Hungary was betrayed in 1956 with that uprising. It was betrayed so that the true nationalists would be killed and taken off to Gulag. And the CIA participated in that treason, in that betrayal. Why do you think Prague was invaded with tanks in 1968? And all the leading Czechs there, probably many of them Protestants, that were revolting against their Soviet occupation, they were all arrested and taken to Gulag, betrayed by Allen Dulles of the CIA. Of course, it wasn't Allen Dulles then. He was relieved, so it would be, what, John McCone, or maybe it was that other traitor. But the CIA heads betrayed the patriots of Prague, Czechoslovakia in 1968. Richard Helms. Why do you think the Poles were betrayed in World War II when they were incited to have the Warsaw Uprising, and they said they would be backed by American power and OSS, and they were automatically betrayed when they rose up against the Nazis occupying Warsaw, and Joseph Stalin and his Red Armies sitting on the outskirts in the forest, letting all the Polish nationalists get killed, some 60,000 of them. Why? Because we got to put Poland under the Soviets during the Cold War, and we got to kill some more of these Polish nationalists because the Polish men love their country and consider the Polish flag sacred, as everybody ought to in their own countries. Both sides working together to kill nationalists and targeted populations. Why do you think Hitler stopped his panzers at Dunkirk and refused to bomb and strafe 250,000 British soldiers and allowed them to escape back to Great Britain when they could have been annihilated? Why? Because Churchill and Hitler worked together. Why do you think General Patton was not allowed to close the Falaise pocket in France that would have captured 250,000 German soldiers? And he went to Eisenhower and said, listen, Ike, all I got to do is close that pocket of Falaise, France in there, and we have the German army surrounded, and we will either destroy them or they will surrender. And you know what Ike said? Let them go! Don't close the Falaise pocket. And Patton was absolutely astounded. So Patton's going to try to talk about it later, for which he's going to be murdered by Wild Bill Donovan, Irish Roman Catholic Knight of Malta, heading OSS for the Pope. They're all working together. FDR and Hitler working together. You know why? They couldn't close the Falaise pocket. That would have ended the war. They can't have the end of the war in 1944 because we got nearly 1 million more Jews to kill in the concentration camps. That'll stop the purging of the Jews out of Eastern Europe and Western Europe. We can't do that. We got to send more to Auschwitz. See how they're working together? Are you getting it? Vietnam. Realized Mao and Nixon worked together. Mao and LBJ. You got Kennedy out of the way because he wanted to get out of Nam by 1965. So we got LBJ there, that apostate Protestant, serial adulterer. Trump is an altar boy compared to LBJ. Trump is an altar boy compared to Ronnie Reagan. Reagan was a pedophile. He loved kiddie porn. That's what Kathy O'Brien tells us in her book, Transformation of America, which I'm going to be reading a portion of it after the break here. Vietnam. Mao and Johnson working together for the destruction of the Buddhist manhood in Vietnam, calling them all communists. Meanwhile, the American military training the North Vietnamese so they'll be a viable force. Trained them during the daytime, at night they were Charlie. I had a friend of mine that was in Nam. He said, Eric, I was in the Navy. He said, we watched the oil freighters go into the north to Hanoi and unload half their load and then come down to Saigon and unload the rest of it, fueling both sides of the war, bringing oil to Saigon as well as to Hanoi. What kind of war is that? It's called a controlled war where both sides are run by leaders that are fed, subject to the
This is the Eric John Phelps Show on 24/7 World Radio.
This is Brother Jack. I invite you to listen to my broadcast on 247worldradio.com. I preach the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ to the Polish-speaking people scattered around the whole world. Furthermore, I defend the Reformation in Poland, Polish Protestants and Baptists, and Polish Reformation Bible. I also expose the Counter-Reformation in my homeland, led by the Jesuits and by the Roman Catholic institution. Join me every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 247worldradio.com. Tu brat Jacek, zapraszam Was do wysłuchania mojej audycji na 247worldradio.com. Głoszę Ewangelium Pana Jezusa Chrystusa ludziom mówiącym po polsku rozproszonym po całym świecie. Ponadto bronię reformacji w Polsce, polskich protestantów i baptystów oraz polskiej Biblii reformacyjnej. Demaskuję również kontrreformację w mojej ojczyźnie kierowaną przez jezuitów i przez rzymskokatolicką instytucję. Dołącz do mnie w każdy czwartek o godzinie 17 czasu wschodnioamerykańskiego na 247worldradio.com.
This is Brother Nicholas. Join me every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the German Bible Truth Hour and at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Dutch Bible Truth Hour on 24/7 World Radio. This is Bruder Nicholas. Ich lade euch herzlich ein, mich anzuhören, jeder Dienstag um 2 Uhr nachmittags, amerikanische Zeit, für die deutsche Bibelwahrheitsstunde und 3 Uhr amerikanische Standardzeit für die niederländische Bibelwahrheitsstunde am World Radio 24/7. Dit is broeder Nico. U bent hartelijk uitgenodigd om elke dinsdag om 2 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Duitse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen en 3 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Nederlandse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen op 24/7 World Radio.
This is 24/7 World Radio, and you're listening to the Eric John Phelps Show.
Brother Eric John Phelps back with the second hour, continuing on. So we see that the Jesuits, with their minions, control both sides of these wars. They control both sides in Korea. When MacArthur landed his naval forces, again I have this fuzz. When MacArthur landed his naval forces at Incheon in Korea, where the tide rose and fell 40 feet, he left his destroyers on the beach. And he set back the North Koreans tremendously and was able to win the Korean War if he would have been allowed. But you know what happened? MacArthur was a bad boy. He did not obey his brother Freemason, Dirty Harry Truman. And so Truman flies to Wake Island in the Pacific. MacArthur is ordered to meet him there, at which place MacArthur is relieved of his command by Dirty Harry, because you see, Korea cannot be won. The American military that won in World War II can't win a little skirmish in Korea, because the military government running the country since March 9th, 1933 was beginning to beat down and beginning the destruction of the powerful American military that was built during World War II. While at the same time, they're going to kill off Korean men who are nationalists in North and South that love their country. And then ultimately, Korea is going to be divided, what, at the 38th parallel. and it's going to be a ceasefire, but the war continues to rage. Because the real secret purpose of the Korean War, Mao bringing Chinese troops down through the north, and Truman using American troops, the real purpose of the war is that Truman and Mao, both Freemasons, by the way, would be used to discourage and demoralize the American military in conjunction with forced integration, of course, which was terrible for it, American military, and while killing Korean nationalists, so that they ultimately would militarize South Korea with the ROKs, great fighting force of the South Koreans, and also with the Korean military in the north, to ultimately then merge them into one huge militaristic nation to be used against us here in North America someday. That's the purpose of it. You mark my words, South Korea will fall without a shot firing. They will unite with the North, and there'll be one huge military force in league with Red China for our invasion. And guess what? Both sides were built by Washington, D.C. That's why we were not allowed to win Korea, because both sides worked together for the purposes of the Pope in its counter-Reformation design of destroying historic white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Baptist Western civilization. That's how we understand Korea. How about Vietnam? Vietnam. Well, we're going to get involved in Vietnam there, and really from 1945 to 1965. 1945, 1975, for 30 years. Pardon me. And what's the purpose of that? It's the purpose to kill the Buddhist leadership there, because the Buddhists don't have any time for the Pope. The CIA took the Dalai Lama out of Tibet in 1959 so they could ultimately control the Pope of Buddhism. By the way, the Dalai Lama is also a high Freemason too, betraying his own people. So they're going to get in Vietnam, and Vietnam is going to be called Spelly's War, Francis Cardinal Spellman's War. And Francis Spellman will go to Vietnam in 1965, and they're going to call it Spelly's War. And he's going to call the American soldiers the soldiers of Christ. You can read this in a book called The American Pope by John Sweeney, written in 1988. Read it and weep. There's another book I have here called Vietnam, Why Did We Go? The Shocking Story of the Catholic Church's, quote-unquote, role in starting the Vietnam War by Averell Manhattan. That was written in 1984. Now listen to this. The Pope used a powerful Knight of Columbus who was in charge of the American Navy to bring hundreds of thousands of North Vietnamese Roman Catholics down to the South, because they spread the propaganda that the Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ went south. So as we read, and on page 33 we read, quote, the following year, another fanatical Catholic was appointed to another important post. Mr. Francis Matthews was nominated Secretary of the American Navy. That's during Dirty Harry Truman's presidency. On the morning he took the oath of office in June 1945, Mr. Matthews, his wife, and all their 6 children contritely heard Mass and received Holy Communion in the chapel of the Naval Station in Washington, D.C. A few months afterwards, October 1949,